everyone. I'm Angela Jackson. I'm the founder and executive director of Global Language Project. We are a New York-based nonprofit that works with underserved schools to teach languages, of course, Arabic, Mandarin, Spanish, and French. And really the premise behind the project was taking kids from underserved areas and giving them a skill that could be highly coveted in the workplace, and then at the same time, giving them an expanded vision that they can have. What this really stemmed from in this work was based on my own experience. So before founding Global Language Project, I worked for Nokia and I worked in an international capacity. So I worked in China and I worked in a lot in Europe, and I saw that all of my colleagues spoke 2+ languages. And I saw the mobility that it gave them in terms of their personal lives, but more importantly, in terms of their work lives. And this meant a lot for me. My background was very far removed from Asia. I grew up in a small town in Illinois. I was raised by my grandparents, and I was raised in poverty. So when we talk about mobility and career opportunities, this is something that really spoke deeply to me personally. And so when I found myself just one generation away by being raised by my grandparents, they only had an elementary school education. One thing that they really instilled in me was just the power of education and how that could make a marked difference in my life. So fast forward in one generation, I saw that difference with just having my own career and being able to work in China. But there's something that happened there. When I was there, it was, I often thought, why me? You know, why was I the one that made it when I had family, I had cousins, I had relatives that were still living in Illinois. I had people that I had went to the same public school with from the earliest ages in elementary school that were still stuck in this small town. They were still stuck either unemployed or underemployed. And I wanted to really understand what was it about me and what could I do to make a difference? I felt compelled to make a difference. So working at Nokia, I started to think, well, how can I give back? What can I do? What is it about this experience that has started to transform me? And really what I began to pinpoint was, it was my travel throughout the world. A lot of the people that I grew up with, they've never left that small town in Illinois. They're still there. So when we talk about a global economy and we talk about what that has to offer, they've never heard about it. They're really stuck and really trying to survive day to day. And so what I really felt that they needed was vision. And how do you take all of these amazing things that are happening around the world and bring them to places that might be isolated because of poverty? How do you give people seeds of hope that they can then use? So again, my experience was around travel, and it was around learning languages because I was working internationally. So I started to write a business plan. And the idea that I came up with the point was, I need to take high school students who reminded me of myself, and they need to travel abroad. They need to see the world. So as I started writing a business plan and started to do my research, a couple things that I found out. I had this theory that high school students, that the reason why poor and minority students weren't studying abroad or weren't traveling was just because of money. And while that was one of the reasons, through my research, what I found out, there were a couple other issues. One was the fear of things that are foreign. When you go to really small towns, when you talk about China, when you talk about Europe, that seems very far removed when you talk about the number of Americans that have passports. So there's a lot of fear of the unknown. When we talk to parents about their children studying abroad, it would be, how am I going to be treated? If they're a minority, how do they treat African Americans? Am I going to be discriminated against? And so even at the high school years, there were a lot of foreign beliefs. And what I realized at that point, that's a huge barrier to overcome. I was working in Harlem, and I was working with the Harlem YMCA, and they had a group of teenagers that they wanted to send to Colombia in Latin America for 2 weeks. They couldn't get one teen in Harlem to sign up for this program, and it was going to be a 2-week program. They couldn't get one to sign up. And at that point, I realized that we needed to start earlier. So the picture there is of a classroom that I have in Hamilton Heights in Harlem. And what I did with my plan is we decided that we needed to go back to the earliest ages, before they had started in their minds formulating what is possible and what is not possible, what is foreign and what is different. But before they realize that there's and there's some statistics coming up here. In New York City specifically, when you talk about homelessness, when you talk about when kids who grow up in poverty, that they're going to be 2 times as likely to stay in poverty as adults. So when I want to start with children, it was really important for me to start with children to realize and start with them at an age before they realize that the deck is statistically stacked against them. Because if you knew some of those stats growing up, many of us would feel very hopeless. So we started with children in the 3rd grade back in 2009. We had 30 students, 15 of them learning Spanish and 15 of them learning Mandarin. I had my business plan and I had a lot of fire in my belly, and I was really excited and passionate about what I was going to do. I was going to go in and I was going to teach languages, and these children would get a proficiency in a language, and my long-term vision was that they were going to go out and change the world, that having this 2nd or 3rd language was going to get them a job, and was really excited. When I got to that first school in Hamilton Heights, I tell people I was in for a bit of a rude awakening. A couple things happened back in September of 2009 when I started the program. The first thing that happened was my grandparents and my grandmother, who had been my complete inspiration, literally passed away a week before I started the program. The second thing that happened when I started the program and going in is that although I grew up in poverty, I was about 15 years removed from it. So what I really didn't understand, I thought I understood, I really didn't understand the complexities of poverty in a big major inner city. So all of my lofty kind of goals and ideas as I was prototyping and coming up with the idea of Global Language Project, I literally had to step back a bit. There are a couple assumptions that I made when I was writing my business plan. I assumed that kids want to learn languages. I assumed that their parents would value language learning. I underestimated, like I said, what poverty meant in those environments. When I went to that school for the first time, I was shocked to learn that a lot of the teachers didn't have the basic necessities to do their job. You have to realize I come from corporate America. I didn't walk into my office every day wondering if I had copy or paper. I mean, it was just the basic things that these teachers were missing before we could even get to teaching lessons. The other thing that I faced when we had that first month of class back in that September was this whole idea of classroom management. And it was something, again, I hear educators laughing, and you should laugh because you have corporate people who want to come in with kind of an S and they want to save things, and then you realize you're dealing with little humans. And your best laid plans, right, they go out the door, right? So, and mine did. That first month I had a Spanish teacher and I had a Mandarin teacher, Julia, and it was her first time teaching in a Western classroom. So again, if you're thinking about all the things that are stacked up against you. And I remember I walked into her classroom and there were 15 students. At this point, we had an after-school program. And I promise you, it was like the Wild Wild West. The kids were like doing cartwheels on the desk, and she's trying to teach Mandarin. Some of them are paying attention, some of them are not paying attention. And I remember I kind of backed out the door slowly, and I put my hand to my chest, because it just all, like, my life flashed before my eyes. I was like, I quit my corporate job to come in this school to teach Mandarin, and no one's learning. Like, I had to just really admit there was no learning going on in that classroom. And as I backed out the door, I kind of stood against a wall and was catching my breath thinking, okay, what do I do now? You go to problem-solving mode. And I remember one of the students' fathers taps me on the shoulder, and I turned to him. His name is Edwin. I said, Edwin, how are you? And he goes, I'm fine. He goes, I want to give you a little bit of feedback about the teacher, the Mandarin teacher. I said, no, he didn't say Mandarin teacher. I want to give you a little feedback about the teacher. I said, well, which teacher? And he goes, the Oriental teacher. I was like, oh my God. Okay, so again, coming from a corporate and PC world, that doesn't exist. Being a person of color, I was like, okay, how do I correct him? I keep thinking, it's Oprah, it's a teachable moment, but what do I do now? So I started to think, this is all going to be about, teaching students Mandarin, but I really realized in that first month, in that moment, that there are a couple things that are going to happen. One is, I had a lot to learn. I had a lot to learn about the education system. I had a lot to learn about the people that I was trying to serve and really step in their shoes and understand. There was going to be education for the students, but there also had to be education for the parents and for the school community if we were going to really build community consensus around this. One thing I realized is that we have, in our minds, we have a lot to give. we have an idea that we want to put out there, but I think when you're creating a plan and you're prototyping, you also want to make sure that that's something that people actually want to receive and that they find value in. So there was a lot of learning behind that. So that first year, it was bumpy. Like I said, it was a lot of trial and error. We had to do a lot of professional development with the teachers, teaching them how to teach in a Western classroom. We had to do a lot of kind of community building. So going out to the parents and understand, instead of me thinking what we were giving them, understand what they were bringing to us. There were a lot of first-generation students. There were parents from literally all over the world. So when we studied different units, like Colombia, for example, when we were teaching Spanish, we had parents who came in and taught the children the cumbia. When we studied the Dominican Republic, we had that same parent, Edwin, come in and tell them about Carnival. And really, slowly by slowly, we begin to really build value and equity in the school and really become part of the fabric. So that program went from an after-school program the first 2 years to a program by that third year that was embedded in the school day, where we went from serving 30 students to serving the entire school of 240 students, which was tremendous for us. And what it really showed for me, and we're still learning, the one piece that came out and I shared with you about the teacher support, what we found, and when we think about our future and what the sweet spot will look like, it really is about supporting educators and making sure that they have the tools that they need to really develop and deliver high quality instruction. So what we started in that third year is we started creating our own curriculum that was a K-5 curriculum in Mandarin, Arabic, and Spanish that was very different than how I say I learned Spanish, because it was all about conjugating a verb, and I couldn't get past hi and hello. We wanted our kids to be able to actually use the language. So we built a curriculum that was based on Common Core standards, thematic units, and most importantly, play, so they can use the language. Because learning a language doesn't happen overnight. It's a journey that's going to take multiple years, and we wanted to make sure that they were invested in staying in it. And then the other piece of it was about professional development for the teachers, and that's really what the future is for Global Language Project. When we think about scale, we know that we can reach scale by reaching educators. We know that by giving them a solid curriculum that they can use, by giving them professional development, by pairing them with coaches and models that they can use, that are showing schools that are showing innovation, that we can make a difference in how languages are taught, not only in this classroom, but really throughout the world. And how that really relates to what we're doing here and talking about highly coveted skills. When I look at these kids, I really do think that the future is theirs. I think that there's an amazing possibilities for them on where they can take language. I know that it will open doors. And what I'm going to do is just leave you with one story, which I think is really interesting. This is Preston and his sister Maxine. Preston was a student the second year of Global Language Project. And what was so interesting about him is he started studying Mandarin in the 2nd grade. He's now in 6th grade. And his sister Maxine, she's now our first-year student in Mandarin. So when I started the program, we were presenting models for him. Now he's become a model for his sister. He's in a more competitive middle-class program, and he was able to put on his application that he had studied Mandarin for 5 years. And it's a funny thing when people see a little brown boy who studied Mandarin for 5 years, they think that he's smart. Well, guess what? He's always been smart. We've always saw the potential, but now that we've given him, thank you, but now that we've given him a skill that other people value in the corporate world, now they put him on this pedestal, and it's opened a door for him. And that's really what my dream and wish is for all children, that we give them something that could be a calling card for them. And that's what you need in your lives if you're thinking about, when you have the deck stacked against you, how you can make change and how you can impact change. So that's my project with Global Language Project. Thank you so much.